Richard Marquand's 1983 sequel Return of the Jedi is a stunning and satisfying conclusion to the story begun 6 years earlier in Star Wars. It's also a fairly obnoxious advertisement for the franchise's ballooning merchandising efforts. It encapsulates both the artistic highs and the avaricious lows that went on to define the franchise during its later years. It's also a curious course correction after the artsy Empire Strikes Back in 1980. Rather than that film's emphasis on character, atmosphere, and theme, Jedi, from its very first drafts, relies almost exclusively on its propulsive action to keep viewers engaged. Maybe this is what you wanted from a sequel to Star Wars, and maybe not from a sequel to Empire. In any case, Jedi builds up to a wonderful story climax, so let's figure out how it gets there. This is Equipment for Living with Return of the Jedi. Alright, get your bearings. Return of the Jedi is about a rebel warrior called Luke Skywalker. In the last movie, he was defeated by his nemesis and father, Darth Vader. This movie will answer the question of whether Luke will live up to his potential, or whether he will fall to the dark side. In addition to these character stakes, the fate of the galaxy also depends on the outcome. But we don't meet Luke for a while. Jedi opens with Darth Vader visiting a new Death Star under construction, and telling the officers of the Emperor's imminent arrival. We then cut to Tatooine, where the droids are approaching the palace of Jabba the Hutt. At minute 5, 3PO touches on the film's theme.
Lando Calrissian and poor Chewbacca never return from this awful place.
The idea of rescue also shows up in the opening crawl. This film will, appropriately, be about how we come back from our darkest places. And not just physical rescue, as in saving Han from carbonite, but redemption of the soul. The droids are taken to see Jabba. Right away, we see that the minds behind Jedi place much less emphasis on structure than they did in Empire. Where Empire had a clear and direct call to adventure, there basically isn't one at all in Jedi. The closest thing we get is in minute 9, where Luke claims to be a Jedi Knight. Actually, his arc concerns returning from defeat to become a Jedi Knight in this film. Also note, his warning here not to underestimate his power clues us into an important aspect of knighthood that Luke still has to learn: when to use power and when to sheath it. The Max Rebo band plays, a dancer called Ula is killed, and then Leia and Chewbacca are captured too. All in efforts to rescue best-selling toy Han Solo from being frozen in carbonite. Almost 22 minutes in, Luke himself finally shows up. Luke is dressed all in black, like a Sith, and his demeanor is changed from Empire. We're not sure if we trust him. Has defeat turned Luke bad? Luke is quickly thrown to the Rancor but survives, so is then thrown to the Sarlacc, but also survives. In a fun and exciting set piece, Luke proves that he's at least up to the task of rescuing his friend Han. The heroes fly away from the benighted world of Tatooine at minute 36, 29% in. Just like in Empire, they go their separate ways. But unlike in Empire, the threads of the first act in Jedi go nowhere. The Jabba storyline is over. Han's debts are liquidated. His eyesight returns. Leia dons a sensible poncho for the rest of the movie. And no one ever speaks of any of this, ever again. This is a structural weakness in Jedi. The first act has fun action and features all your favorite action figures, but it's disconnected from the rest of the film. Let's be charitable and say it's a dress rehearsal for the redemption Luke performs on Vader later in the film. But besides that, what of thematic or plot relevance occurs here? Like, it's a genuine question I'm asking you. And it's also annoying how it gave a lot of later threequels permission to waste their first acts rescuing either a beloved side character or, in an even more boring twist, the protagonist himself. But, like the characters, let's forget everything about Act 1, except the theme, and dive into Act 2. In the honeymoon, Luke heads for Dagobah, and the others rendezvous with the rebels. Meanwhile, we cut away to establish the B character. It's hard to tell because, again, this movie is much less aggressively structured than its immediate predecessor, but I think Darth Vader fits well as a B character here. After all, what greater challenge to the idea of redemption is there than the most evil half-man, half-robot in the galaxy? He is shown interacting with his master early in the honeymoon, about 38 minutes or 30% in. Luke returns to Dagobah to complete his training, but it's too late. Yoda is getting into his deathbed. Yoda talks about underestimating power. This idea gets thrown around a lot in this movie, enough that it might have been intended as the film's theme. I'll keep track of this idea too, but I think the other one, about redemption, is far more powerful. Yoda becomes one with the Force, and Luke gets a chance to ask why Obi-Wan lied to him. Obi-Wan fills him in on some of the plot revelations of the previous film. Vader is Anakin, Leia is Luke's twin sister, and so on. We then sync up with Han, Leia, Lando, and the rebels. There's a briefing scene here, just like in the third act of Star Wars, because Jedi technically functions as the third act of the trilogy, remember? And, with Luke back on board, our heroes hatch a plan to take down the half-built Death Star. There are some fun hijinks involving swoop bikes on the forest moon of Endor, and Leia meets walking toy promotion Wicket. From the point of view of underestimating power, the Ewoks make a good deal of thematic sense. But from the point of view of redemption, they are fuzzy little distractions. The first draft of the original Star Wars had a similar obsession with what George Lucas seems to think of as primitive natives, too. In the third act of that first draft, tribal Wookiees paint borrowed X-Wings and learn to fly them, taking down the Empire in the process. The story changed before filming, but the idea of primitive underdogs seems to have stuck with Lucas, and it rears its fuzzy head again here. I'm not a fan of this trope generally. Imagine if instead of Ewoks it had been human hunter-gatherers, mystical natives who overcame the technological empire despite being primitive, and the condescension of the conceit becomes clear. But maybe if it had been Wookiees, it would have felt stronger, and maybe closer to the Vietnam parallel that Lucas was trying to draw. Maybe a better version of Jedi would have had the rebels freeing some Wookiee slaves who went on to take down the Empire, earning some redemption in the process. But the fact that it's these cute and cuddly walking teddy bears instead sours the whole thing for me. It's transparently designed to appeal to children rather than to serve the story. Just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with appealing to children. Exploiting them is another thing. 66 minutes, or about 52% in, we check in with our B character, while raising the stakes in a subdued but functional midpoint. The Emperor prophesies that Luke will come to Vader. It is a matter of time. And then things get worse. But not really, and only slowly. Luke and Han are scooped up by Ewoks. Luke narrowly prevents them all from becoming barbecued by making 3PO float like a god. Luke reveals to Leia their shared heritage. And then, the most important thing in the whole movie happens. Except it doesn't happen in the movie, it happens off screen, and we have to fill in the blanks. I have no idea what was going through Lucas's mind here. The low point, around 82 minutes or 65% into the movie, has Luke turning himself in to the Empire. This ultimate act of surrender is the moment where Luke's journey to becoming a knight is most endangered. It shows him learning to trust his own power while not underestimating that of his opponent. He turns himself in to distract the Emperor, knowing it'll get him killed. And like in Empire, it's a low point that Luke inflicts upon himself. He senses that in order to reach his potential, he needs to make this sacrifice. It's a great low point, but it happens off screen for some reason. In the aftermath, we see Luke pledge to try and redeem Vader, but Vader's not having a bar of it. The low point comes a little earlier than average, neatly splitting the second half of Act 2 into two further halves. The second half of Act 2 concerns the jiggery pokery with the shield generator on the moon of Endor, Luke meeting the Emperor, and the space fleets massing for battle. Luke remains a pacifist. His power remains sheathed through a lot of twists and turns. But eventually, he can't take any more. The moment where he ignites his lightsaber and starts fighting is, as close as we're going to get to, a break into Act 3. The true test of whether Luke has what it takes to be a Jedi Knight and to redeem his father starts now, 104 minutes or 82.5% in. The third act is where Jedi really shines. It finally tests Luke's ability to be the knight he longs to be, and he teeters back and forth between victory and failure. He fights at first, then sheathes his weapon. But when Vader threatens Leia, Luke loses control. This beat, at minute 112, 89% in, constitutes the reversal. In this moment, John Williams' score soars, and Luke loses his self-control and allows his passion to take over. He defeats Vader, but upon recognizing their shared suffering, he sheathes his blade for the last time. This turning point allows the metaphysical current to flow again. The rebels get the shield generator down and throw everything they've got at the Empire. Meanwhile, under pain of torture, Luke calls out to his father for help. Remember that the father symbolizes that which came before you and is passed on through you. By calling out to Vader, Luke is basically forgiving his father for his fall and recognizing the commonality between them. Because if Vader can't be redeemed, then neither can Luke. So Luke risks everything to prove that Vader can be redeemed. And the great, sweeping triumph of the original trilogy, the bit that professional troll Ryan Johnson forgot, is that the movie has a resounding answer to this question. Redemption comes not from using power to enact justice upon those who defeated you. Redemption comes from forgiving them and forgiving yourself for failing. Redemption comes from surrendering power through the painful act of forgiveness. That's why I've focused on the theme of redemption throughout this video. The power one is there in the background, but the redemption idea hits harder. Vader's soul is rescued by his son's forgiveness, and together they defeat the evil oppressing the galaxy. Symbolically, Luke's breakthrough means that the rebels can now blow up the Death Star too. The reason the explosion is cathartic is because it was earned by way of thematic revelation. In the denouement, Luke burns his father's body, and the Ewoks sing Yub Nub. The naive farm boy from Tatooine managed to bring peace and justice to the galaxy in 3 painful steps. First, by transcending his selfishness. Second, by learning that evil comes from everywhere, including yourself. And now, by redeeming himself for his own failures and evil through forgiveness. The third act of Jedi is just about the perfect finale for the trilogy. It blows open this gorgeous chest of human knowledge and lets us bask in it. Forgiveness, redemption, when to use power and when to spare it. It's crucial we understand these forces in our lives. And it makes a clear statement. Good and evil are real, they both exist inside us. But you can redeem the darker elements of yourself first by forgiving yourself. It's powerful, it's timeless, it's universal, it's classical. My problem with Jedi is not the third act, it's everything that comes before it. The first act is largely fan service, retrieving the best-selling toy from retirement. The film should either have spent its entire runtime trying to redeem Han, or spent less of the first act doing so. Devoting a full 29% of the film to nothing but this robs us of further insights that could have been sown and reaped over the course of 126 minutes. As well, the second act is far too gentle of a trial for Luke, almost like the filmmakers were gun-shy after the darkness of Empire. At the end of Act 2, Luke is barely different than he was at the start. Yes, he understands he has a sister now, and he decides he's ready to hand himself over to Vader. But none of that decision-making happens on screen. It's an entertaining movie, and I definitely loved it as a kid. But those first two acts could do a lot more to support the third, because that third act is packed with great equipment for living. Thanks for watching this breakdown. If you found it insightful, please leave a thumbs up. If my ramblings have stoked an insight in you, I'd love to read it in the comments. And if you'd like to see more movie breakdowns, click subscribe and ring the bell icon to make sure you don't miss any future videos. In a couple of months, once I've started on some other franchises, I'll be starting on the prequel trilogy to see what, if anything, that has to tell us. And in the meantime, I might put together a short video on the structure of the original trilogy as a whole, considering all three films as a single, continuous story. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. Bye for now.